Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Slice of Mentorship, the podcast tailor-made for leaders committed to supporting entrepreneurs on a grand scale. I'm your host, Igor Gorlatov, and I'm excited to introduce our distinguished guest for today, Michael Goldberg. Michael serves as the Executive Director and Associate Vice President at the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western University. With his unique blend of venture capital experience and academic excellence, Michael has become an influential figure in the realms of entrepreneurship and early-stage finance. Here on Slice of Mentorship, we seek to deliver invaluable insights to those of you who manage mentorship programs, run entrepreneurship centers, or lead nonprofits. So let's dive in and tap into Michael's wealth of knowledge. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for joining me for the Slice of Mentorship podcast today.
It's great to be here, Igor.
So let's start with those mass online courses in entrepreneurship education. You were one of the early adopters. So could you talk a little bit about how your thinking has evolved since the launch of Beyond Silicon Valley?
Sure. Yeah. MOOCs, which stand for Massive Open Online Courses, were launched with some fanfare originally by a couple of professors out of Stanford who went on to form Coursera in around 2010, 11. The Coursera model, and there's a few different ways that that online courses and MOOCs have sort of come to the market, but the Coursera model involves a partnership with a university, and Case Western Reserve University, where I'm based, was a early partner of Coursera. And the idea for my specific entrepreneurship MOOC grew out of a Fulbright that I went on to Vietnam in 2012, and I was asked to put on a seminar about how Vietnam could become more like Silicon Valley. And I said, actually, you guys look more like Cleveland. And I ended up putting on a seminar using Skype for any listeners that have a good memory of bygone technologies. But we had some folks in Cleveland from government, from the philanthropic sector, from the private sector, talking about what Cleveland has done to support the growth of entrepreneurship. And then that seminar became the basis for the MOOC that I launched for Case Western Reserve University on Coursera in 2014. And I think what's fun about those platforms, and actually those were relatively early days in the MOOC world, there's been lots of ups and downs with online education and some of the platform providers since then, was that, you could, I guess, like anything entrepreneurial, you sort of put something out in the world and see if there's customers that are interested. And we had a pretty good receptivity to the course. We've had, 100, I think almost 200,000. We had 175,000 users take the course. We have 16 languages it's been translated into. And I think a little bit of this Cleveland as a case study, not people pounding San Francisco as the case study over people's head, seemed to resonate. So it's been a lot of fun being involved in trying to share ideas on the online learning platforms, and seeing, at least in some ways, it has resonated. The approach has resonated with some folks from all over the world.
So beyond moving away from Skype, could you name 2 or 3 shifts that you've observed in the evolution of MOOCs?
Sure. I mean, I think the business model MOOCs, to some degree, is still evolving. I think there was a lot, and in some ways, it mirrors the evolution and the ebbs and flows of tech companies and venture capital backed tech companies specifically. In the early days of MOOCs, it was a user game. So just like, don't worry about profitability or making money, just like get lots of users to the platform and kind of figure out the business model later. That has gotten squeezed, and particularly as some of these providers like a Coursera or 2U and a few others have like all gone public, and the public markets have not, certainly in the last year, not treated technology companies broadly speaking and ed tech companies specifically, like, that were challenged on the revenue side or profitability side very well. So I think there's been some evolution in terms of the business model around online courses. I mean, I think in some ways the good news has been, and whether the platform is YouTube, LinkedIn, people's own blogs, like there's a preponderance of ways I think that entrepreneurs and educators are able to like share things that we think are important in the world. So while some of the early platforms like a Coursera or an edX or Udacity, I think there's been disruption and acquisition and consolidation in these platforms. Like, I think the good news is like there's still a lot of opportunities for people that want to share something, want to teach something, want to coach, want to mentor. I know these are things, Igor, that you and I think some of your listeners have an interest in. Like, there's just a lot of ways to provide that education, that coaching, that mentoring across different platforms.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I appreciate you bringing up this human element, because otherwise it becomes very one-sided. Like, there is plenty of information, but making sense of it, this is where you need some kind of engagement, even if it's interactive. And you mentioned Vietnam as the country that you were involved in trying to. They asked for Silicon Valley, and you suggested Cleveland. Could you talk a little bit about if you follow the trajectory a little bit, what has happened? Have they accomplished what they set out to do?
It's been interesting. I mean, I've been gone from Vietnam for over 10 years. I've kept in touch with a number of people. Actually, my book was translated into Vietnamese, which was neat. I mean, it's a growing country in terms of population, and it's a very young and growing population. I think some of the dynamics, even coming out of COVID and many countries like the U.S. looking to diversify supply chain outside of China, has really helped Vietnam. I think even, and it's interesting because I think Vietnam, and SARMs, I was just talking this week to somebody in Thailand. Actually, I'm going to be heading out for a Fulbright this summer to Cambodia, and I'll be doing some work out in Southeast Asia. And someone in Thailand was mentioning Vietnam, and Indonesia is Indonesia is another place that I've done work in the past. I've been sort of a little bit faster growing than some of their counterparts in that region. So I think while you're starting to see, and I think the reality is the successes of an ecosystem and growing, it takes time, and government intervention, which is actually a big part of the Cleveland story, has been a big part of Vietnam story. So there's been significant support for startup companies, for the venture capital ecosystem from government in Vietnam, and we see it in many other places. And it just, while there's progress, it does take years and decades for sort of like a really robust private sector ecosystem to grow. So the venture capital community, which was like kind of small when I was there 10 years ago, has grown. There's more angel investing. There's more activity like on university campuses, but I think it's still a work in progress, even with the success they've made over the past 10 years since I've been there.
Were there any like specific ideas that you discussed with them that you saw implemented?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I think again, as I alluded to, they were kind of wanting the Silicon Valley path. And we did spend a lot of time talking about the different strategies around government programs. And I think some of the things that we've done in Ohio and in Cleveland, where there's requirements for matching dollars, I think that can be really powerful. Because I think if government is the only backer, and it doesn't matter if it's the Vietnamese government, the city of Cleveland government, the state of North Carolina government, like I think government officials are often not very well suited to like pick winners. Interestingly, I just got back 2 weeks ago from Ireland, and I was visiting. I mean, Ireland has been very active in supporting their entrepreneurial ecosystem, also like trying to attract foreign companies. There's a company called Rent the Runway, which is a US based startup, went public on the NASDAQ, was at one point raised, worth up 1.7 billion. They like Ireland, like made sort of an attractive offer for them to set up their tech base there in Ireland, and they have a building, but like it was interesting, like the week that we were there, literally this is just a couple of weeks ago, like the stock is trading under $1. These things happen, like it's not so easy. And like, so all of the work that, let's say, the Irish government did to sort of say, hey, let's bring Rent the Runway to Ireland, and they've got a great future, like we'll see what happens. Like, obviously when you trade under $1 for some period of time, you're going to get delisted. And so the future isn't 100% clear. I mean, the market cap of the company went from like 1.7 billion to like 36 million. And I'm not blaming the Irish government or any of the sort of governments, but like it can be very challenging, I think, for governments to like pick winners. And so that is something that I remember discussing in great detail with the folks in Vietnam. And I continue to do that as I kind of travel around the world, exchanging ideas with folks. It's like, A, it's a long haul, and B, this idea of kind of matching private funds to match government funding, I think can be really powerful, just to kind of keep not necessarily governments in check, but just sort of making sure that there's market validation for what you're doing.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. And you also talked a little bit about your glamorous, like traveling opportunities, which is super exciting. So could you share a little bit some like pivotal moments in your career that led you to what you're doing today?
Yeah, I'm a travel junkie. So early in my career, I it was actually really my first job out of college. I graduated from Princeton, and then I had gotten a grant when I was in college to go to South Africa, and then I ultimately moved there for 3 years after college. I spent a year teaching in a rural Black school, and this was right before South Africa's first democratic elections in 1994. So I worked for a non-governmental organization, NGO, that was supporting voter education programs for South Africa's first democratic elections when Mandela was elected president. That was awesome and amazing. I mean, I was like, in my early 20s, living and working in South Africa, working all across the country, did some other work in the region, worked in Mozambique on their first democratic elections, and just really planted the bug for me, just the joy of working and living overseas, getting to know people, trying to make, in some way, like just a small contribution. And when I came back to the US to go, I ended up getting a joint MBA from Wharton and Master's in International Affairs at Johns Hopkins. I was like I didn't really know what I was going to do with my career wise. I just happened to kind of time it well with the rise, kind of unknowingly at the time, of the like first internet wave. So I got a job at AOL, America Online, which some of my students have never heard of to date, because they went from being, the largest internet service provider in the world to being basically irrelevant. But these things happen in the tech world. So I worked in their international business development group and actually worked on joint venture work in China. We signed but never launched a joint venture with Lenovo in China and other parts of the world. So that was kind of, I guess in some ways, the international travel and work has been a constant in my career. And I've done it in a few different ways. Obviously, like this is now the third. I did a venture capital fund with a partner base in Israel, which actually brought me back to Cleveland. And now I guess this is sort of the fourth chapter of my career where I'm teaching at a university, Case Western Reserve University, but still doing a lot of travel and doing programs like Fulbright, which is the U.S. State Department program that allows faculty and students from the U.S. and overseas to come to the U.S. So that's been a really neat way. So yeah, I guess international travel has been the constant, and I've like done it in a variety of different ways in my career.
So I'm curious. It looks like every point you just shared, it's like a big win, like getting to a top school for your a bachelor's degree, then Wharton, another top school, getting sent in your 20s to South Africa. How does it happen? And has mentorship influenced in any way this career journey, or was there something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think mentorship. There's so many people along the way that helped me, whether it was the university or graduate school application process, whether it was getting my foot in the door with the NGO I worked with in South Africa, whether it was networking. I mean, even to get like my first summer job when I was in at Wharton, I went to work at Microsoft, and it was a friend of mine from Princeton that kind of helped me navigate there. I've always tried to take advantage of folks in my alumni network or friends network. And I guess I've never been shy to ask for advice and help. And I think that, now it's interesting because I work with students and try to help them do that. And, there's tools like LinkedIn and others that make it, I think, a little more efficient and easier. But I think fundamentally the same basic tenets of like a willingness, sticking your neck out and asking for advice, asking for people's time. I think being appreciative and mindful, not to ask probably for too much time. So I've been using some of those approaches throughout my career. And, now I'm at a point in my career where I'm, when I have 3 kids and I have many students here at the university. So, certainly am able to kind of share my own experience with these folks and try to like help them navigate, because there's a lot of technology out there, which in some ways helps speed up and enable things, but there's also a lot of like bad habits, I think, that get formed with reliance on technology, like just like applying for things online or reaching out on LinkedIn without following up. And like, I think some of this just takes effort. I think, as Igor, like, and you've shown it throughout your career as well, where it's just like, it's hard work and effort to network. It's not just like, it just doesn't magically happen because like invite someone to connect on LinkedIn.
I get to talk to a lot of folks who are moving into Charlotte, and some of them are moving like from outside of the US, like from Belarus, former Soviet Union countries. And a lot of people who were successful in their past careers, when they come to the US, they kind of struggle. Some of them are young and some of them are mid-career or even a late career, but they struggle to figure out this networking piece of the US culture. So if you could like summarize the key steps for someone who is new to this, either like a student or someone who is an immigrant, what are like a few things to keep in mind as you make this decision? Okay, I want to be successful. I want to build my network. I have nothing in this country, or I haven't done anything. I don't have a LinkedIn account, or I haven't tried doing this intentionally. How do I begin?
No, it's great. I mean, I have a very deep appreciation and admiration for the immigrant journey in the US, both as like the, you know, grandchild of immigrants that sort of came with nothing. And then I've worked with many students over the years, and I know how hard it can be. It can be very, it's very disorienting. I will say, because you mentioned LinkedIn, like the first step is actually like setting up a LinkedIn profile, which again, so I think people are like, why do I need a LinkedIn profile? But I think it's a good forcing mechanism to try and communicate the things that one has done and the interest that one has, so that that can often be sort of an important first step. But, I think on this topic, and I talk about it actually with students all the time, like, students are like, I don't have anything, I'm trying to like network with somebody super accomplished. Obviously they know I'm looking for a job or I'm trying to, sell something. I think students don't sometimes look like they may. I often encourage my students to like, is there, maybe you see that this person is interested in a certain topic. Maybe there's an article that you could send that, it's like, I noticed that, and maybe it's you, Igor, where it's like, mentoring's a big topic of yours. Like, hey, if you, would love to connect. And I saw that you do a lot on your podcast, with mentoring. Like, here's an article that I saw that I thought you might have an interest in. Like, that's to me some like a next level, like a student or an immigrant or someone that like thinks on one level they don't have anything to offer, like offer up, a link to an article or a podcast, or, can you sort of share something with the individual that's like shows that like you're taking that next step of exploring what might be of interest to them. And I think sometimes that's hard. That's hard for students to do. But I like when I see students or anyone just like try to go to that next level and be like, what can I do to provide something of value to the person I'm trying to network with?
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. I like that idea of oracles. I'll definitely use it when I talk to people. Especially now, even the language barrier is less of an issue because there are tools that can help you like get through that. So thank you for sharing. So right now you work in the academic environment with students. How did you end up in that space?
Like many things in life, it was like kind of accidental. I was asked to guest lecture here on venture capital, and then that led to an opportunity to teach one class as an adjunct professor, which means that you're doing it part-time while you have a day job. And I just really liked it. Like I enjoyed, you know, teaching for a semester. I was a little like daunted by putting together a syllabus and grading and exams and things like that. But once you do it the first time, then it's easier once you do it after that. And I just sort of found that a university is just a great setting to really try to connect the dots between things that I've been able to work on in my career, people in my network, and kind of like hungry, interested students and faculty on our campus that sort of want to learn more. So yeah, it was like not, it wasn't really planned, but I've really enjoyed. So I've now been full-time at the university, Case Western Reserve, which is a private university in Cleveland with about 12,000 students. I've been here full-time for about 10 years, teaching and now running an entrepreneurship institute on our campus.
And with this entrepreneurship institute and kind of making, you mentioned fourth career happen, what was the journey like from being an adjunct and kind of teaching a course and putting your first syllabus together to kind of defining what organization does, such as launching a new institute?
You know, it's not a straight line. I mean, I wasn't even sure I wanted to be a full-time faculty member or somebody working at a university. And I just kind of started adding more courses to what I was teaching just based out of my interest. And then, I mean, you know, and for those of your listeners, which I assume are most, or live in the US, it's interesting how access to healthcare plays a role in some of our decisions we make in our lives. Like at one point I was just talking to our dean and I was like, how many more courses do I have to teach to get healthcare? Because at that point I was like paying for my own healthcare. And so like, it wasn't that many more courses. I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll do that. So it was like, at that point, it was 6 courses across 2 semesters. And so that was, you know, probably less aspirational and more like tactical. Like it'd be nice if my family had healthcare coverage. And but I really liked what I was doing. So anyway, it was like that one conversation about healthcare may have been what actually pushed me over the edge, but it was a good decision for me.
Very cool. So shifting gears a little bit. So you've been in the academic world for, you mentioned 10 years, and you've been in entrepreneurial world for a while. So what kind of learning do you believe entrepreneurs need?
It's interesting, I think, given this opportunity to teach entrepreneurship, you know, I mean, there's many successful entrepreneurs that didn't take entrepreneurship courses at universities, right? So it's not as though the path to being a successful entrepreneur necessarily is like goes through a university. So I think the other thing is I teach a lot of students entrepreneurship who actually probably aren't going to go start something. They're probably going to go at least immediately out of school, go take a job for a variety of reasons. I think what's been interesting in the courses that I've taught is, it's challenging. Like I'm currently teaching an entrepreneurial finance class, and that's actually I've taught it for a number of years, and we kind of look through the lens of like how entrepreneurs have basically financed their companies, and part of attracting capital to a company is some of the same. If you don't successfully identify your customer, and you're really solving a real problem out there, you're unlikely to be able to raise capital along the way. Or I guess there's some cases where it'd be like Juicero or something. Some of these like major busts were like, somehow the companies were able to attract a lot of capital when they weren't solving a real problem in the marketplace. But I think we spent a lot of time on things like product market fit, listening to entrepreneurs and sort of their journeys. And again, knowing that many of my students probably won't start something right away. I mean, some of the entrepreneurial approaches they may take in an intrapreneurship role, which means, basically innovating within an existing company. So, yeah, I think there's a variety of different ways. I do feel like for me, one of the keys, both actually, this was true in my Beyond Silicon Valley MOOC and in my class, is like getting outside voices and getting diverse outside voices. I think that's really important. That students, like on a campus like ours, that are diverse, like can identify with people that are speaking with them. I mean, unfortunately, the entrepreneurship world is still pretty heavily white male oriented. It's changing, but it's not really super diverse. So it's important that we bring in speakers that have had a variety of different experiences and share those with our students.
Oh, am I hearing you correctly that you're essentially democratizing entrepreneurship, like spreading it beyond just traditional entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that may be a generous way to describe what I'm doing. I mean, I do think that certainly on a campus like ours at Case Western Reserve University, like if I only sort of tried to reach the people that raised their hands that wanted to start something, like that's a pretty small subset of our campus. So like we actually have our pitch competition coming up this week. And when I took over this competition, actually somebody else was running it originally. It was for formed ventures. So like you would have had started a company, and now so we still have that track, but we also have an idea track, just like, again, using your word, sort of democratize, like let's open it up to people that just have an idea. And interestingly, I was actually just one of my students I was correct, like commenting on her assignment over the weekend, like, is the right metric for an entrepreneurship institute at a university the number of companies that are formed? Probably, in my view, probably not. Like if I'm like, there's lots of forgive my maybe crassness, like dumb ideas that like don't deserve to be funded. That doesn't mean that there's not a tremendous amount of learning in the journey to come up with this idea. It's just like you shouldn't form a company around a dumb idea, but if your metric is company formation, like I could like incentivize the creation of lots of companies on our campus if that was my metric. I just don't think that that's the right approach.
So you mentioned a number of tactics. So I'm curious just to learn more, like guest speakers, exposing folks who take your courses to entrepreneurs. I've also heard a perspective at GCEC that entrepreneurship is best practiced by like doing, and then like you have to do entrepreneurship. This is the way you learn it. And there were a few folks who actually like build their own, like their courses or their programs around encouraging people to start companies, even if those are just like as part of the course, so that students get exposure to what it really is like. What's your perspective on this learning versus teaching? Can you teach entrepreneurship? What does it take to learn entrepreneurship in an academic setting?
I think, my guess is some of those other conversations that you had, and I believe in this strongly, it's like experiential opportunities are really critical for students. And that could be pitching their own thing. It could be working on a project. Like we actually just got back, I alluded to a recent trip that we took to Ireland. I have the students working with, I call them mini projects, because they're just sort of and it's actually interesting. I think this whole idea in terms of having student teams work as consultants in a variety of different ways can be really powerful. It can be challenging to kind of frame an engagement, particularly these sort of free things that are part of courses where maybe the company may have um, high expectations, and it's not always easy for students to kind of meet those high expectations. But that being said, I'd rather have the host company have some high expectations and try to get the students to step up. But I think these are all flavors of experiential learning that students can do while we have them on campus, and with the goal that obviously then they're eventually get a graduate with an undergraduate or graduate degree from here, and then are doing this in the real world. And by the way, maybe some of those same students that worked on a project, a sponsored project here, then they're the ones that are sponsoring the next projects for a next group of students. So I think there's also an element of giving back to in some cases their alma maters, or it could be companies in the community. So we really do try to find different ways, experiences for students to kind of roll their sleeves up and learn that way.
Beyond working with students directly, do you see a role for universities in supporting entrepreneurs like in the community?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think, for example, at our university, our institute is situated in a facility called ThinkBox, it's actually the largest open access makerspace on a university campus in the US. So we have people coming in from the community to use our 3D printers or wood shop or CNC. We've got all sorts of really cool, equipment for those that want to make. But we also have floors. I mean, obviously not every entrepreneur is making a physical product, so people are sort of coming in. So I really welcome that interaction with the community. Some universities are actually, excuse me, contracted by, often government or foundation dollars to do this work on behalf of the community. So, I've talked to colleagues at Arizona State, they're very active in supporting startups in Arizona, like University of Chicago's Polsky Center has some resources to do that. So some of it is what else is happening. Like in Cleveland, where I'm based, we actually have a pretty robust economic development ecosystem. So there's an organization called Jumpstart, which supports venture development. There's a few others as well. I try to stay in our lane. Oftentimes it's referring people out to our community partners, and then just making, and then keeping in close contact. I mean, the last thing we want to do, and the community partners, same way, you don't want to just refer out to a partner and then you don't know what happens after that, or they're not getting served. So we have to just make sure, I think, and part of this, I think, just comes down to better data management and tracking, what do we, if we're sending somebody out for a funding or something kind of opportunity, how do we capture that and make sure we track it?
So I understand correctly, this idea of staying in the lane means being a good player in the ecosystem, which seems to be pretty robust in Cleveland. So you don't have to be creating new paths. You can just send folks to things that already exist. So does it mean that this is a good excuse to just keep this involvement in the community at this level? Or
I think it's an interesting question. Hey, frankly, if an organization has been funded to provide support, and it could be, in the case of Cleveland, there's some really well-funded, robust programming around diverse founders, right? So it could be female founders, it could be underrepresented minority founders, and they have services and funding available. So if others are getting funding to do that, and those funding and services can benefit community members or my students, I want to send them out to do that. Now, if I believe that they're not being served well by these programs, I want to make sure we understand that. And also I think part of being a good partner in a community is like having honest conversations with others in the community where you think they're not delivering on the programs that they're being, I mean, these are scarce resources, like whether it's government or philanthropic resources, or even private sector resources. Like, I think we want to make sure that we're delivering, the collective community is delivering and supporting our entrepreneurs, these programs. So I'm also not afraid to be honest with folks if I feel like what their programming is not, is coming up short in some ways.
I appreciate you sharing that. And this leads to my next question, which is questions that you have about supporting entrepreneurs. Are there areas that you are still like kind of thinking about, curious about, you don't have the answers for, and you would like to hear perspectives or learn perspectives from others, perhaps some of our listeners, of viewers?
I think, access to capital. I mean, when you talk to entrepreneurs about challenges they might have, I mean, that can be at the top of the list. It's not the only thing that entrepreneurs struggle with, but and I think when you live and work in a market outside of Silicon Valley, like a Cleveland, and we don't have like a really robust venture capital community here. So, there's some creative ways, including like we're doing something on campus right now where we have some philanthropic dollars from a foundation to invest in alongside, venture-led deals and syndicate in either alumni, students, or spin out to the university. So like that's been an interesting experiment. I've talked to a number of other folks at universities that are doing similar kinds of things. Because sometimes it's actually not even the amount of money, but like your what does it mean? Like in this case, for the university to show up on somebody's cap table, which is what we refer to as kind of the ownership, structure. So, I'd say access to capital broadly is a topic that we're actively engaged in learning and discussing with others because it's a real challenge.
What's the biggest insight so far that you've learned kind of recently?
I do think having capital, like in our case, we have this fund sort of sits at the university. I think the other cool thing, and I'm wearing my educator hat, is like we have students involved in helping manage and deploy the capital. So and now actually two of my students have gotten jobs in venture capital. So it's a nice little
very cool. Congrats. This is huge.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, one's down in your neck of the woods working for a fund out of Chapel Hill. The other one's here in Cleveland. But yeah, so I think this insight that like teaching about venture capital and investing can be a really powerful way to educate folks about entrepreneurship. That's been really good I think we've made some nice progress in that area. Still a long way to go, but we've made some progress.
And based on what you shared, it was not just teaching, it was truly experiential learning for those students.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've mentioned your Fulbright to Cambodia in summer. So could you talk a little bit what excites you the most about this opportunity? Why did you pursue it? And what are you hoping to accomplish?
So this will be my 5th Fulbright. So I started in Vietnam. I did one in Namibia, one in the Canary Islands in Spain, and one in the Azore Islands in Portugal. And just been really fortunate to be awarded these these grants. Fulbright, as I think I alluded to, is run out of the U.S. State Department. It's just a really wonderful program, and it's in some ways actually it's the brand is better recognized outside the U.S. than it is inside the U.S. Even though it's a U.S. program. So I'll be heading to Cambodia. When I was a Fulbrighter in Hanoi, I visited Cambodia at the invitation of the U.S. Embassy in Phnom Penh and did some workshops with the National University of Management in Cambodia, and that's who's going to be hosting me this time around. And yeah, I mean, using the Beyond Silicon Valley MOOC is kind of a platform to talk about some of the things we chatted about in today's discussion about role of government, role of philanthropy, access to capital, role of anchor institutions. And I'll also be doing some work in the region. Actually, my daughter, kind of runs in the family now, is going to be spending 2 months on a Duke University fellowship in Gujarat province. And so I've actually never been to India, so I'll be popping over to India on the way, and some discussions at the U.S. Embassy there about doing some workshops as well. So yeah, this will be a lot of travel, but something I really enjoy doing, and always appreciate the ability to kind of, and I guess in a very small way, make a contribution just based on some of the things that I'm seeing, in the country wherever I'm working.
I'm with you. I actually was on a Fulbright scholarship when I was in Belarus, and I was sent to the University at Buffalo, and it was an amazing experience. So congrats on your trip. I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun, given that this is your 5th opportunity. This is awesome. Last question for you. So we talked about a number of your interests and roles. What's one book you find yourself recommending the most, and why?
So I'll recommend a book of a colleague of mine and a friend named Brandon Cornuke, Cornuke. It's called The Value Proposition Matrix. So Brandon actually moved to Cleveland after working at Target and a few other companies, more on like the corporate innovation side. And I think for anyone who's used, it's kind of a Steve Blank or Alexander Osterwalder disciple using the business model Canvas. Brandon, what he's done is even the Canvas has 9 boxes and it's around product market fit, and Brandon kind of distills it to 4, also very focused on the value proposition. And I use it in my courses, and I've just found it a really there's some great, this isn't to discount some of the other stuff that's out there. I just have found it very, very useful and helpful, and kind of distilling some of the key elements of the value proposition. So it's a book that I would recommend.
Very cool. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you wanted to mention?
That sounds good. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and folks are welcome to reach out to me directly. I'm active on LinkedIn, or michael.goldberg@case.edu is my email, and happy to connect with folks. And if I can be of value in any way, happy to chat.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate having you on this podcast today.
Thanks, Igor. It was really nice talking to you.